Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Daily Defender. Great to be with everybody. Great to be back with you all in another video. So, without further ado, let's get into our administrative notes. First of all, thank you for all the views. Really appreciate it. I think folks are liking the content, so I really appreciate it. We can certainly use more subscribers. So if you could please subscribe, hit the bell, and we could use more comments. We've had a few, but we'd really like to have more input with you all and more feedback, replying to comments and taking input from you folks. And like I said, kind of gathering that all up and building it into other videos. So I'd like to see more of that. Also, as usual, my disclaimer on my face blur, it's strictly because I'm a civilian in a day job and just want to protect myself and my family and be able to express the content or my views on my page. So that's all there is to that. So with that out of the way, what we want to talk about today is kind of an interesting little firearm. This is about 100-year-old firearm, and this is of course unloaded. It's happens to be a Smith and Wesson 38 Smith and Wesson, not a 38 Special, Regulation Police. And we've also got a Chief Special out on the table as well, and it's of course unloaded as well, because it's going to come in to be a comparison here in terms of frames and where this went after the after the I-frame with this regulation police revolver. So without taking any more time on the introduction, let's get into the pistol. Right, so as I just introduced, this is my Regulation Police Smith and Wesson, and it's a really interesting firearm. I probably didn't expect that I was going to own a firearm, maybe of this type or age, and not necessarily from a cost standpoint. Right, these are not sought after by collectors per se. There were a lot made, etc. So finding one and affording one is not overly difficult. But I never was really sure if I was going to have something like this in my collection. One of these kind of smaller frame guns, and we'll get into that. But I started to become just more and more intrigued with Smith and Wesson and then their entire story. And this appealed to me. I mean, I'm sure I will. I'm sure I'll have something at some point in the 1852 to 1890 range. I just haven't really come across something that has kind of met maybe what I was looking for. But this pistol, this revolver is very interesting to me because it falls into that early 1900s category. And that's what this is. This is actually about 100-year-old pistol, as the case may be. And as I stated in the introduction, all these firearms are unloaded. And we do have a Chief Special here as well, and I'm going to utilize that as a comparison and when we get into the frame discussion. But again, what this is a Smith and Wesson. A 38 Smith and Wesson Regulation Police, and so it's not chambered in a 38 Special, which actually I didn't really understand when I was looking at these. I really just kind of jumped into this hand ejector style gun, and that was one of the other criteria that I was kind of looking for when I started off, and I decided that I wanted to maybe get one of these early 1900s Smith and Wessons. I actually went kind of looking for a true hand ejector, and I understand this still meets that criteria, as I guess almost every Smith and Wesson revolver does. But I think if I remember correctly, the 32 Smith and Wesson caliber hand ejector HE was truly called out by that name. This one has its own name, the Regulation Police. So, but at any rate, that's kind of how I got into this firearm. Walked into the shop, saw it, kind of caught my fancy. It was relatively inexpensive. It kind of met my criteria for this early 1900s firearm. And yeah, I'm really glad I purchased it, and really glad that I own it. So what are these things, right? So And I don't have, again, I'm not trying to write a history book here, but basically for me, this version, the 38 Smith and Wesson Regulation Police, is a pre-war, so pre-World War II, built on an I-frame, and we'll talk a little bit about that with a square butt. This particular one is is um, is pretty early. These guns were basically made from 1917 to 1940, and based on the serial number. And I did call Smith and Wesson. It was interesting. At first, he said early 1900s, and then we kind of talked through it a little bit, and then he thought mid to late um, 1920s. And from the serial number on the firearm and from some other research, I think that's about true. With these earlier guns, it gets a little sketchy with serial numbers and exact manufacturing dates, etc. Back in the day, but I think we can fairly estimate this is probably a 1924, 1925 with maybe a push to 1929 or maybe just slightly earlier, but that seems to ring true with the features on the firearm and the serial number and what I've been able to gather. It is a 5-shot, which is pretty neat. And you've got the, I'm sorry, 5 screw. My apology, 5 screw. You've got the 4 there and the one up here on the trigger guard. So it is considered a 5 screw. But it happens to be a 5-shot as well. But again, back to this 38 Smith and Wesson cartridge and not a 38 special. And that's a whole nother interesting part to me. And kind of, again, I didn't really realize exactly what I was buying at the time. I hadn't done all of my research. The gun kind of caught my attention before I had done all the research, but it was in a shop that I go to very frequently. And again, the price was right. And it just kind of seemed to fit that. They too thought it was a mid 1920s, vintage gun. So that was all very very intriguing to me. But so this caliber is interesting, and I just wanted to take a minute to kind of show this to you because I found it interesting. A lot of the hand ejectors and early Smith and Wessons, of course, very early, were 22 rimfire, and we can get into all of that down the road about their cartridges. But Smith and Wesson actually was a cartridge developer. If you look up some of these cartridges, 32 Smith and Wesson, for instance, that's on Wikipedia. Daniel B. Wesson is the name that's attached to this caliber. So I think that's another interesting part, and probably another sub video that I'll do just on this interesting part of early Smith and Wesson. They are not only gun manufacturers, but were designing cartridges and cartridges with guns and back and forth. So I just find that very intriguing. But this is the 32 Smith and Wesson cartridge. This firearm again is chambered in the 38 Smith and Wesson, but again, not to be confused with a 38 special. And you can see the difference of those cartridges. So that's a pretty big difference. And just for kind of argument's sake, or another comparison, that's a 380 right there. But if we kind of just remove all that out of the equation, that is the caliber that this firearm was chambered in, 38 Smith and Wesson. And yeah, I think it was considered, obviously, the 32 and 38 Smith and Wesson, I think were considered pretty anemic cartridges. They had served their purpose early on, but as we all know, then Smith and Wesson quickly moved, maybe not quickly, but eventually moved into 38 special, and they were doing other things with other calibers, etc. But again, back to this particular revolver. This is the Regulation Police chambered in 38 Smith and Wesson. What else can I tell you about it? It is on an I-frame. That's probably maybe one of the interesting things as well, before we kind of just walk around the pistol. The I-frame was, I don't remember the exact years of the I-frame, but this particular pistol, again, was made from 1917 to 1940. So we certainly know that they used the I-frame at that point. At some point, there was also an improved I-frame, and that had more to do with a coil spring advancement, as I understand it. So we had this I-frame, then we had the improved I-frame, and actually before the I-frame there was an M frame, M as in Mary, and it was even smaller, almost maybe I don't want to say diminutive, but a smaller firearm. And if I'm not mistaken, I'll have to double check this. I think that gun may have been the first time the term ladysmith was used by Smith and Wesson. But this is an I-frame, and the I-frame then eventually became the J-frame. And that's why I had the Chief Special out here, just so you could kind of see that side by side. The J-frame definitely got larger because it had to be chambered for the 38 Smith & Wesson. And probably the easiest or best way to see that is in the cylinder, right? Because the cylinder had to become larger and elongated. To chamber the 38 Special. So you can see this development from the 38 Smith and Wesson to the 38 Special in the J frame. So that's a little bit of that I frame, J frame, kind of nomenclature and understanding of how that works within Smith and Wesson. What else can I tell you about this gun? It's we kind of ran over the 5-screw 5-shot. It's a 4-inch barrel. It is pinned. It has this very unique ejector rod, and if you kind of take a look at it, it has this gnarled, if that's the right word, or I believe I actually found the term mushroom that they referred to this ejector rod with this end as a mushroom. And I don't know how long the regulation police was made with this style. What I did learn is this style seemed to hark back to another firearm, which I believe was the 32 hand ejector of 1896. When I did some research on that, it had this style mushroom, if you will, ejector rod. And that was actually the way that you released, I believe, the cylinder. It was not the style. So again, I don't know all the details on that, but it certainly seems that this particular part of the ejector rod harks back to this 32 Smith and Wesson hand ejector from 1896. So I found that pretty interesting. It took a while to understand what they did here. There were about a million I-frames, I guess, produced, not just in this caliber, but overall. And then I think I read somewhere there were something like 50 or 55,000 of the regulation police made from 1917 to 1940. So that's kind of some interesting data. As you walk around the pistol more, there's all these little interesting cues to it. Again, it is a pin barrel. We kind of talked about this mushroom mushroom ejector rod. It does have a Smith and Wesson logo stamp on it, and this was interesting too. As I researched more, it sounded like these logo stamps came in and out. Again, this started in 1917, but I think these guns were made under contract for the government, or for the U.S. government or the U.S. Army, and there was a period of time where they didn't have the logo stamp on it, and so I believe this was resumed in 1920, which again helps come back to what we think the age of this firearm is. If we think this is a mid-20s, 1920s firearm, and it does have the stamp on this side, on the left side, then that seems to ring true, because it seems like that's when Smith and Wesson started putting that back on the firearm. If we close it up, you can see here that Smith and Wesson is, hopefully you can see that, I'll try to do that, nicely etched. It has the old style and symbol, and I had looked that up. I think it's called an ampersand is the fancy term for this symbol, but you can maybe see it there, the old and symbol there that Smith and Wesson used. As we kind of walk up and down it again, you've got a kind of just a rear trench sight, if you will, fairly high blade front sight. The firearm here is stamped with information, including made in mass, I believe, and made in the USA, I should say, and some other informations, including patent information, which they stamped on the top of the barrel, which is pretty neat. Um, the stocks, as I understand it, were specific to the regulation police. They were these walnut, checkered diamond pattern grip, and it had this. The way that kind of came around the back strap was unique to the regulation police. And as we kind of keep walking around it, this one actually is, I thought it was in pretty good condition. It's by no means perfect, but again, it's a 100-year-old gun. And, we've got some spotting here. We obviously have wear on the cylinder. You've got some wear on the ejector rod, but the grips or the stocks are actually in pretty decent shape. Again, for a 100-year-old firearm, it actually says regulation police on this right side of the barrel. And again, it's caliber 38 Smith and Wesson CTG, which simply means cartridge. So 38 Smith and Wesson as the cartridge, and it's stamped right on the barrel. I think it's also pretty cool that regulation police is actually stamped right there into the barrel. I don't believe there are too many Smith and Wesson firearms. Maybe the Lady Smith. And I'm sure there's one or two other that are escaping me that actually have their name stamped into the firearm. And of course, in 1957, Smith and Wesson went to numbers. And I'll do a little more research. I'll see if the regulation police then in 1957 went to a number. I did not look that up before I started the video. And the other kind of interesting thing is it also has this patent date down in the bottom of the grip. And that's patented June 5, 1917. And I think, again, their very early regulation police did not have this stamp. And this was another attraction to the firearm when I walked into the shop, right? It had the old Smith and Wesson um, logo, or not logo, but font, if you will. It had this patent stamp in the bottom of the stock. It had information stamped on the top of the barrel. It had the name on the right side. I just thought it was a really neat piece, and it kind of fit that niche about wanting or putting into a collection something in this 1900s to maybe 1940 range. Um, the iframe, it's not a big frame, right? This is a small frame. And again, it came out of these smaller cartridges, the 32, the 38. It has kind of this diminutive, very small size. It doesn't have any of the, kind of the muscle of a K frame or anything like that, or obviously, an L frame or something like that, or an N frame. But it does really, to me, represent, the firearm of the day for police. And I don't know the history on how successful or popular it actually was with police departments. I think I picked up somewhere that New Jersey police department had ordered a fair lot, and I think maybe some police department in Pennsylvania. Again, I'll try to do a little more research and populate that into the video before we publish it. But so yeah, that's the Smith and Wesson regulation police that I own, and it's like I said, it's been a neat firearm to own. It's been interesting to research it. It's it harks back to this small frame, small caliber revolvers that Smith and Wesson was building at that time, and it's just kind of neat to own one. And it's got some nice history to it as it moves into the iframe, and it has this 38 Smith and Wesson, and the hand ejector part was very intriguing to me. It's still, in fact, they still call it, and maybe I mentioned that already, but they still refer to it as an iframe hand ejector. So even though this firearm had the regulation police as its firearm name, it is built on an iframe hand ejector. So again, it kind of fit my criteria of owning a hand ejector from that era. So I haven't shot it. I don't think I'm going to shoot it. I may. I just haven't had the time really to get it to a gunsmith to just give it a once over. It seems very solid to me. I don't find any abnormalities to it or strange feature or functionality to it. The cylinder's a little loose, and just a little play back and forth. It's just a little loose here. Trigger, of course, it has the trigger nose in the hammer, which Smith and Wesson used for many decades until they removed that. But the hammer's tight. The nose seems correct. It was a very, very clean gun. The trigger functions as normal. The timing seems fairly accurate or accurate. So I don't think there's actually anything wrong with the firearm at all. But again, it would just given its age, I'm either A, not going to fire it, or B, get it to a gunsmith and have it given a once over before we do that. I understand that they're pleasant to shoot. The frame is a good size for the caliber, and the 38 Smith and Wesson, as we saw, was a pretty small cartridge, about the size of a 380. But so if I do wind up shooting it, now I'll probably come back with another video and give everybody an update. But I hope you enjoyed that. A little bit of a shorter video today, but it's just a neat, fun, piece of history, quite frankly, in the Smith and Wesson era, as we moved out of the 1800s into the early 1900s, and Smith and Wesson kind of finding their way with these hand ejectors, and eventually what became so iconic to Smith and Wesson, of course, and other companies copying it, etc. But I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for taking the time to be with us today. Again, subscribe to the channel, please. Give us your comments, hit the bell. Want to keep moving the channel forward, making it as successful as possible, and of course, we need all your help to do that. So, thanks for taking some time to be with us, and we'll talk with you next time.